Sometimes, exploring means explaining. I'm author and researcher Mike Luoma, and I believe Raven Ridge in Northwest Vermont is a Sea Serpent Effigy ridge, transformed by Native Americans long ago. The evidence is readily apparent to my eyes. Experiencing Raven Ridge features my first discovery of the Effigy Ridge. Return to Raven Ridge shares obvious evidence gathered on my second trip. This third presentation, Revisiting Raven Ridge, provides more analysis, speculation, and possible proof of the Sea Serpent Effigy Ridge in Moncton. You may be wondering, this is a public space. People visit and hike Raven Ridge every day. So why hasn't anyone noticed this sea serpent before? Part of the reason may be pareidolia. Our minds play tricks on us. We see forms like faces on inanimate objects. We often see smiles on the fronts of cars. That's pareidolia. We see myriad forms in the flowing shapes of clouds. That's pareidolia. And sometimes, natural carving caused by glacial erosion looks instead like the work of human hands, because we tend to see, or impose, form and order where it is not. But our minds also compensate for this by ignoring or dismissing any forms we think we might see, which our rational mind deems too outlandish to be real. The features of a sea serpent, carved into a ridge in Vermont, that might not even be allowed to register consciously. Critics may accuse me of indulging in pareidolia, in seeing worked forms in the stones of the ridge, forms which, they say, are not really there. I'll show you what I see. You can judge for yourself. This stone, low and on the right side of the path, greets us as we head in on the hiking trail. Do you see a snake in the stone? This is the hiking trail map for Raven Ridge. You head in across a wetland to the south. That first snake is way down here. A single trail heads up the ridge to meet a loop trail, where it circles around, up, and over the ridge. Let's add Lidar to the hiking map for a better idea. This is the trail up. And this is the loop. Back at the bottom, after that first snake, we find several boulders, including one which apparently points up at the ridge. As you begin to climb, you see this boulder, like a stone message board. There seems to be a line of boulders leading up to the ridge, visible a short way off the trail. Interesting shapes and cuts in these rocks. At first, this could just be taken for a boulder wash from down off the ridge But then we see some more interesting stones. This could be a Manitou stone. These boulders seem to show signs of having been worked on. Look at this split rock. Coated with what I've been told is possibly white wood ash cement, as we see on many stones here. This boulder had some interesting markings as well. This looks like an eye. The boulders and hiking trail meet back up here, up on the ridge, in an area I'm beginning to think of as the entrance to all that lies above. Some of these strangely shaped stones may have fallen from above. There is a possible fish effigy here, carved right out of the bedrock. Do you see the fish? Let me outline it for you. There are details on its surface, too. But is this something more? Look at that outline again. Does it look at all familiar? What if I turn it on its side? I think this could be a map rock, a map of the ridge above us. This other boulder close by kept drawing my attention too. Sort of boat-shaped. The top also seems to resemble the 3D Lidar map of the ridge. Let's look at the Lidar again, so I can outline the Sea Serpent effigy I'm seeing for you. This Lidar comes from the Vermont Center for Geographic Information and their Vermont Interactive Map Viewer at maps.vermont.gov. The ridge runs north to south. I believe the tail of the Sea Serpent is the northern end, with the serpent facing south. I'm turning the Lidar sideways now, putting north to the right so we can see more detail closer. And here is the body of the serpent on the ridge. This isn't just any sea serpent, however. This is the Great Horned Serpent, the Abnaki's Gidaskog. Here are the horns. Let's put these together, serpent and horns. I think we can also see back fins on the Lidar. And a longer tail. Gidaskog, the Great Horned Serpent, on a ridge in Vermont. If we take a right when we reach the loop trail near the ridge top, it takes us down along what I've called a horn of the Great Horned Serpent. We pass 2 stone piles as we go. Hikers often speak of the haunting feeling this place evokes, of how the cliffs look like the walls of some old city or fortress. Geologists and historians have insisted for years this is all the work of glaciers. I disagree. The glaciers did carve much of this ridge out of the landscape, of course. But human hands then adapted it, carved on it, and added to it to create a holy space. These walls are not completely natural. We can see places where the landscape was added to and adapted to fit the serpent form they were working with. More interesting stones as we head north along the eastern side of the ridge. I'm not sure what these stones are or mean, but I feel like they're trying to tell me something. There's what I've called an apparent rock shelter on the side of the Great Horns, on the eastern side of the ridge. I headed closer to get a look at the stone wall extending off it. These stones look extremely old. There seems to be an equinox sunrise alignment, if I read the Sunseeker app correctly. In this presentation, I'm trying to feature footage not seen in my two previous presentations. If you'd like to see more of the rock shelter, please check out Experiencing Raven Ridge. In front of the rock shelter, groups of stones are laid out like claws. And always, the cliff walls lurk above on our left, the horns of the Great Serpent. The scale is staggering. I think some of the reluctance of archaeologists, geologists, and historians to consider this an effigy ridge may stem from this question of scale. There seems to be a sense that the northeastern Native Americans lacked a sense of grandeur, which goes along with academia's denial they worked with stone in building anything up here. These rocks look cut square. Are glaciers really the explanation? This is very curious work. Once again, I've been told this white stuff could be a wood ash-based cement or paint. This appears to be another Manitou stone, painted with the apparent wood ash cement. We headed out along the eastern horns of the Great Horned Serpent, and now head back towards the tail, with the trail going up and over this horn. As we continue along the inside of the horn, I want to see this wall up close. That's where this stone wall is, added on top of what seems to be carved bedrock. The wall doesn't seem to have an alignment. It may be a colonial addition to this place, but take a look at the carving on the bedrock. Even down here, this part of the horn, the bedrock has been worked to resemble a serpent's scaly skin, and boulders have been added to help create the form of the horn. Now, we head west, back towards the ridge and the tail of the serpent, past the end of the great horns. There seem to be trailing fins off the great horns. This fallen tree has revealed some interesting carving on this one. Most is natural, but I believe there are some additions. As we start to climb the ridge again, and the tail, we find the bedrock worked and boulders perched to create the trailing fins of the Great Horned Serpent. Some of these cuts and these stones do not look natural to me. These stones seem deliberately placed to be spiky fins along the ridge of the tail. It can be hard to see in the footage. We can perhaps see better in these stills. These boulders seemed tumbled out of their places. But the Manitou stone next to them, carved out of the bedrock, like the fish below, remains to greet us. I featured this stone prominently in my Experiencing Raven Ridge presentation. I showed what I thought were the most blatant signs of human workmanship in my second presentation, Return to Raven Ridge. This almost made it. Another curiously shaped stone, like a ridge or fin on the serpent's tail. The top is very oddly shaped. Then I spotted the little fin down the hill. You can see more of it in Return to Raven Ridge. I stepped off the trail to socially distance and found this rock near the back, on the western or outside edge of the ridge, was worked and shaped. This is definitely shaped to look like reptile skin. We're now up on the north part of the ridge. The hiking map and Lidar don't sync up perfectly, so this position is approximate. I showed some footage of this big exposed slab of bedrock on the western side towards the back of the ridge in Return to Raven Ridge, but mostly to show the way the top was carved. But there's more going on here. Let's back up a little. I ventured out at the base of the slab to see if there was anything carved into the stone. I may have found some petroglyphs. Take a look. This could depict the Great Horned Serpent, or other forms. Maybe even a human? This is all highly speculative and highly subjective at this point. As soon as I drew these shapes, I could see other possible forms. Certainly, in this case, we must watch out for our own Pareidolia. As I've shown, especially in my Return to Raven Ridge presentation, The ridgetop is where the serpent truly reveals itself. We find surfaces sculpted and shaped to look like the scaly skin of a reptile. We find fin after fin after fin. Some of the details are quite small. Others are large and landscape altering. Further along outside, on the western edge of the ridgetop, we can see the stone has been shaped, natural curves augmented by human hands. Down on the outside edge for another point of view, we can see the carving on this outside bedrock is pretty wild. Looking back up, we can see even out here, the bedrock has been shaped and stones added and fitted together. Looking south towards the head of the serpent, we see the bedrock looks shaped and carved, in a similar shape to what we saw behind us. I see carved stone all the way down here. As we head back to the more sheltered eastern side of the ridge, we can see how the stones are again shaped to resemble the undulating skin of a serpent. We pass a small standing stone. This small line of stone snakes down from the ridge. This is the section of the serpent that first showed itself to me. Spotting this fin blew my mind. I was not expecting anything here. As this was the spot on the ridge where I first detected the working of the stone into a serpent effigy, you'll find this area covered pretty thoroughly in my previous presentations. As we continue south towards the head of the serpent, we see fin after fin. The ridge is itself sculpted and worked, with stones added to accent the shape of the sea serpent. And everywhere the bedrock is worked and stones added to create the look and feel of the back of the serpent. These perch boulders are up here on the eastern side of the ridge, where the horns spread off from the body of the serpent. This complex fin, coated with natural wood ash cement or some such material, is up here near the head as well. Here's another look at this curious boulder, which I still insist is carved into a fish effigy. There seems to be a great deal of quartz in the stone. Also near the head of the serpent, but on the outside western edge of the ridge, I showed off a perched stone fin where the horn sweeps off the body. And carved boulders placed on the ridge next to it to emulate the ridges on the body and horn of the Great Horned Serpent. We also saw stones like these in places below, where they may have fallen from previous placement on the ridge above. You can see all these ridgetop features in greater detail in my Experiencing and Return to Raven Ridge video presentations. We've just about reached the natural feature the fold in the rocks or anticline folks call the oven. It looks like a classic stone oven to many people. An accepted use of Pareidolia when you think about it. As it's up here at the head of my alleged sea serpent, it's certainly, at least, the fearsome mouth of the great beast. You can also see much more of the oven in my other presentations. There are many boulders strewn about in front of and below the oven on the ridge. That's where I found this enigmatic rock, with a square hole bored right through it. Very curious. As we make our way back towards the descending trail, completing the loop, we see all kinds of tumbled stone. After all we've seen, this looks more like ruins to me than simply the work of nature. That is my contention, that what we see here is a natural ridge form worked by human hands into a representation of the Great Horned Serpent on a colossal scale. In other parts of the world, there would be experts crawling all over this place, trying to discover its secrets. But because we're in the northeastern U.S., the biased, racist historical frameworks leaned upon by academia cannot grant to our indigenous peoples the imagination, skills, and sense of grandeur necessary to allow for such an astounding ancient work. Do you see it? The Great Horned Serpent, the Sea Serpent, worked into this ridge? I've shown you the evidence I've gathered so far, which has me convinced this is a place deserving of further study and appreciation. Luckily, much of the ridge is preserved by the Nature Conservancy as a natural refuge. Find out more at nature.org. I'm author and researcher Mike Luoma. You can learn more in my Experiencing Raven Ridge and Return to Raven Ridge video presentations. And thank you for joining me in revisiting Raven Ridge.